should be a single general regulation for all the football system. It's important if I am a club or an agent from Italy, and there is another club, an agent from England, from Brazil, from Nigeria. It's needed to have the same system for the to decision the disputes. Now is not so. There are many interpretations about the system. The third point, the time of the proceedings of the arbitration courts now for me are very long time. It's need to reduce the time, maximum 60 or 90 days from the start to proceedings. So these for me are the 3 important points to resolve and to minimize the disputes for in soccer, in football.
All right, thank you very much. Mike is back. Mike, before you came back, we were still in the introduction, 2 minutes. Though Raffaele took more than 2 minutes. But we'll go for the next now. Udo Seckelmann will give us the intro and about just a little talk about the topic of discourse while we forge ahead. Thank you, Udo.
Very much, Eddie. Well, as I said, it's not an easy task to minimize disputes in football, but I think the most important aspect here would be a functional enforcement mechanism. As I'm gonna say in the main speech, a functional enforcement mechanism is crucial for any football dispute, especially when you have national DRCs or FIFA resolution bodies at place. So that's the most important aspect to minimize disputes in football. But I think, in my opinion, that the biggest problem that we have nowadays is access to justice. Sometimes justice can be quite expensive, and especially when you have, for example, a player as a client that doesn't have a very comfortable financial situation, it can be very harsh for him to either pay the costs for an arbitration case, for example, or to hire a good lawyer to have his rights respected, to seek the court to have his rights respected. So, as I said before, disputes in football, to minimize them is not an easy task, but I'm sure the football industry has evolved a lot in the past decade in that sense, bringing more dispute resolution bodies, ADRs, and etc.
All right, thank you very much. Let's proceed to Tosin. Just a few minutes on the topic.
All right. One of the things which I think is important to note to minimize disputes in football is for parties to have a written contract. Oftentimes, particular parties, whether for employment contracts or for maybe contracts between partners in sports business, some of them usually go into such contracts on oral basis, which is not right. Now, where there's a written contract, it minimizes the chances of having disputes because the terms that have been agreed between the parties are written in black and white. So it's very easy for each party to know their respective obligations, apart from a situation whereby probably there were just oral obligations which have been agreed between the parties. And I think it's also important to have all the terms of such a contract included. For instance, for a player, it's not enough to have the salary written in the contract. Bonuses, other benefits are supposed to be included in the contract. If the club wants to give the player an accommodation, it should be included in the contract. If the club wants to give a vehicle, return, traveling ticket, and the rest of them should be included. I've had circumstances where players wanted to enforce bonuses and some other benefits in their contract, which not expressly stated, they only add the salaries. Now, how does this minimize this in football? If all these benefits, the terms that have been agreed between the parties are written in the contract, the likelihood of a party breaching that obligation is lesser than where, it was just an oral obligation. Sometimes parties may renege from oral agreements which have been made between them. So I think this is one of the things which should be noted to minimize disputes in football. And in a circumstance where the contract is written in a language other than the language of one of the parties, it's very important to get a translator, a translated version, or a version in the language which the person understands before signing such a contract. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin.
All right, thank you. Let me say it's a bit ironical discussing this because I'm sure my colleagues will agree with me. As a lawyer, when there are disputes, you get to make some money. So why would we want to minimize disputes? But anyways, the truth is, it's also part of our job to help our clients to minimize disputes. The fact is, yes, over the past 3 or so decades, the commercial value of sport has increased significantly. So a situation where one party fails to perform its obligations, the stakes are higher now, and that's what results in the rising number of disputes. So from a practical perspective now, and in my experience, I would say one of the tips for minimizing disputes, in fact, it's Tosin to an extent took it right out of my mouth, is your contract drafting. Yes, have a written contract containing all the terms, and the importance of this cannot be overemphasized. Look, the fact is, whether people agree or not, sports law is a thing now, and it has its own peculiar principles and considerations. I've seen situations where clubs or players, people have contracts, and because there are some key things that are not included, either the entire contract or a part of it is unenforceable, and it becomes just a waste of paper. So the thing is, in drafting your football contracts, there is a fair amount of skill and experience that is required to avoid disputes. For instance, there are some boilerplate clauses, like you must include something to state that the contract is subject, to the regulations of the relevant sports governing body. For instance, if in football, the rule says a player under 18 cannot contract for more than 2 years, and you can't go ahead and have a contract that binds such a player for 3 years, that excess will be unenforceable, and it will result in unavoidable disputes. You also have things like exclusivity. When you talk of intermediary relations and all, it's important to clarify whether it is exclusive to a particular geographical region or worldwide. These things in your written contract, they help to avoid disputes, because people's expectations, people's experiences will change over time. But when you have such terms in black and white, you avoid having unnecessary disputes. And another thing is another tip is foresight, and foresight comes with experience too. With the impact of COVID-19, we've heard of sports competitions, leagues having to refund to sponsors or renegotiate. These difficulties have been widespread, but we all heard that the Wimbledon tennis tournament got an insurance payout of about over £100 million, simply because they had the foresight to take out pandemic insurance. So that's something that helps them to avoid any dispute with their own sponsors. So it's important to have foresight, and then these peculiar rules and regulatory requirements that should be included in whatever contract or agreement you might have. Another thing is, realize that sports now, at least at the elite level, is business, it's commercial. So as individuals and as companies, you have to be professional. You need to understand that it is a business, and your failures could have significant consequences. Finally, I'll just say, look, it's a professional sector, so you need to consult, seek advice, seek professional advice before committing yourself to, you know, to anything. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, though you took more than the stipulated time. Roberto, I will just have a 2-minute speech on the topic.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, a lot has been said already, so I'd like to add something practical also. First, to agree with Tosin, who first mentioned the issue of the fact that written contracts are obviously something that would definitely help to minimize disputes, because when the parties are truly aware what they have negotiated with each other, then it would minimize disputes, because you already know what you could expect as the participants and the parties to a contract. However, I do realize that can be quite difficult, you know, especially in African nations, what we have noticed, because of the fact there are so many. When we deal, for example, with an international transfer, it's my experience that there are many people involved in an international transfer, and not always will those relationships be contractually laid down in a proper way. So that will lead to some contractual disputes, obviously. So in order to have less disputes, make clear contracts, and also identify clearly who are involved in a total transaction. So that's one point. The second issue would be then to realize that if you operate and start a transaction in one specific nation, that you always envisage to transfer a player, for example, internationally, if we focus on transfers of players now at this moment, but it could be any issue with an international dimension. Realize that such an international dimension brings also various jurisdictions to the table. So choose the jurisdiction that fits most properly the specific situation. It's not easy, but it's something that's worthwhile to assess in order to diminish these disputes. And then again, as a final statement, also take into consideration, if you choose, for example, the Court of Arbitration for Sport as a tribunal where you would bring a dispute, take into consideration what the jurisprudence is of the Court of Arbitration for Sports, and put into the contract that you will live up to the standards of that jurisprudence, and will respect that jurisprudence, because with arbitration you decide on a case-by-case basis, but if you make clear amongst the parties what kind of jurisdiction you will allow to be leading in your contractual dispute, then it can save a lot of problems. So to stay within the 2 minutes, written contracts, make clear who is involved in the transaction, be aware of the fact that
as a lawyer and as a transfer matching system manager, that the little experiences I've gathered, I would add that there are about 3 to 4 ways we can minimize these disputes. First, we've talked about contract. And in talking about contract, I think it is also right that in Africa, especially, that we educate our players, because most times players don't feel they have rights to determine what and what should be in their contracts. Most times these players don't have copies to their contracts. Sometimes in arbitration, you ask a player, can you submit a copy of your contract? And then the player begins to blab. Again, clubs seem to be more powerful. Clubs seem to play God when it comes to issues of arbitration. And that is a big problem. So when these players understand the need for them to express themselves and demand for their rights, especially when it comes to their contract, it will help minimize the issue. Again, we advocate for a very strong players' union, because no matter how you want to look at it, the players' union has come to stay. FIFPro representing the whole world, and then the domestic players' union. In Nigeria, for instance, the players' union, if strong, would help minimize disputes. Talking about enforcement, like Barrister Kelvin said, has been the bane. I've met him several times in arbitration, and most times when awards are given, it is difficult to enforce. And I think that by the time we strengthen the domestic dispute resolution mechanism, we may have gone 50% to 70% in minimizing sports disputes. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We really had a lot of time. I'll just give the last 2 minutes to Victoria, Barrister Victoria Nlemigbo, to just have a talk while we go to the next presentation. Victoria, please. Victoria, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Oh,
You have 2
all
minutes.
right. Yes, I said good afternoon. The topic is minimizing disputes. Looking at it, you have to look at individual domestic settings and ensure that you work around what obtains in your domestic setting. My colleagues have already talked about contracts. That is very important. Players should be educated to avoid being desperate, and to use all the agents around them that educate them and tell them what to do, because once you get it right at the beginning, the possibilities of having disputes will be minimized. And also, if you look at some domestic circumstances where even if you have a dispute and the ruling has gone in your favor, you can hardly execute it. So we have to look at the beginning of the contract, educate the player, and then you must have a lawyer. It's very, very important. The lawyer will help you understand everything you need to know and help protect your interest and even the interest of your club. Because if everything is done the way it should, there will hardly be any dispute. And I think we should stop at that so that we can make progress. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sorry, Peter from Melbourne, Australia, just give a bit of a speech on the topic of discourse before we move to the next section. Peter. Hello, Peter, can you hear me? You have the floor. You have 2 minutes to just talk on the topic of discourse, Peter. Oh, too bad. Since Peter can hear us clearly. So we'll be moving straight to the next section where we'll be having some presentation by some of our colleagues for just a few minutes. And we'll have the first paper presentation by Barrister Kelvin. I'm sure he's ready for us. We're talking about dispute resolution in Nigeria for about 10 minutes. Then we'll see have some reaction to it. So Barrister Kelvin, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. Dispute resolution in Nigerian football. I will try to keep to time. I think so far we've discussed a bit on how to minimize disputes in football, but as that topic implies, whereas the amount of frequency of disputes can be minimized, the practical thing is that you can never be entirely free of disputes in any industry. So it's important that whenever a dispute does arise, there has to be an efficient system of resolving such disputes. There's something I like to say that where obligations are unfulfilled, there must be a means of enforcing them. And where disputes arise, there must be a means of resolving them. These are some of the fundamental principles on which any society or industry can thrive. And talking about dispute resolution in Nigerian football, there's something I would like to use this opportunity to address. The commonly used phrase that football disputes cannot be taken to court. I think the key provision here is in the FIFA statutes, Article 59, which says that there shall recourse to ordinary courts of law is prohibited unless there is a specific provision within the FIFA regulations. It also goes further to state that member associations, such as the Nigeria Football Federation, must have a clause in their statutes prohibiting the taking of disputes to ordinary courts of law. But it is vital to note that it says also that instead of recourse to ordinary courts of law, there must be provision for arbitration through an independent and duly constituted arbitration tribunal. So two points are vital here. First of all, what are these exceptions where FIFA recognizes that matters can be taken to ordinary courts? An instance can be found in the regulations on the status and transfer of players. You know, under Article 22, it talks about the competence of FIFA, the Dispute Resolution Chamber of FIFA and what have you, to hear disputes. It says essentially there, you know, that the competence of FIFA to hear disputes is without prejudice to the right of a player or a club to seek redress in a civil court of law for employment-related disputes. So as a professional player employed by a club, you are an employee in the eyes of the law. And it means that you are not stopped ordinarily from taking your employment disputes to an employment tribunal or a civil court, as it were. But it's also important to note that the regulatory requirement is that instead of going to court, you opt for arbitration. Member associations are encouraged and required, actually, you know, to promote arbitration as the priority system of resolving disputes. So it's not enough to say that football disputes do not go to court. There has to be a system of resolving these disputes through arbitration. I'll just say that, okay, since back 2007, FIFA issued a circular to member associations. And the essential thing there is setting up guidelines for each member association to have a national dispute resolution chamber. At the FIFA level, they have their dispute resolution chamber to resolve these employment and related disputes involving players and clubs. But on the domestic scene, you have thousands of players, and not all of them can have access to FIFA. It's just likewise, FIFA can't have the manpower to resolve every single dispute across the globe. So relating it to the domestic context now, under the NFF statutes, it's provided that there shall be a system of resolving disputes internally through a national dispute resolution chamber. And NFF, its members, clubs, players, officials are actually prohibited under its statutes from taking matters to courts and are supposed to opt for the internal system of resolving these disputes. You can find that in Articles 72, 73 of the NFF statutes. But the truth is that right now, there is no national dispute resolution chamber set up by the NFF in Nigeria. In the past, there used to be player status arbitration committee, which has adjudicated over these disputes. But for a while now, the committee has and you find that a large percentage of disputes are employment related. You find players complaining of overdue payables, unpaid salaries, and what have you. So despite the fact that we do not have this NDRC, the National Dispute Resolution Chamber, so what happens when there actually is a dispute? From experience, particularly at the profession, in some of these disputes, for instance, there's under the regulatory framework of the league, the LMC has the power to sanction a club for failing to meet its financial obligations, failing to pay players, or failing to pay other clubs transfer fees. So you find that where these powers are exercised, when there's a complaint, for example, banning the club from registering any new player, it serves to resolve such disputes. Also, importantly, the league management company has the power of inquiry under Rule C15 of the league rules. That power entitles it to even summon any player, official, or club to answer to it where there's a suspected breach of the rules, and even to produce documents before it. So essentially, that has and can be used to resolve disputes that arise within its jurisdiction. Then there are also some procedural considerations which must be taken into account for the purpose of resolving football disputes in Nigeria. For one, when you talk of making maybe a claim for overdue payables, payments are supposed to be made and have not been made, under Article 12 BIS of the FIFA regulations on the status and transfer of players, as well as B9.45 of the league rules, these provide for overdue payables. Clubs can be sanctioned for failing to meet their financial obligations. So in a situation where someone is being owed by a club, one procedural consideration is putting that club in default. It's not enough to just take your disputes to the league or to the NDRC and say you're being owed. You have to fulfill the procedural requirement of putting the club in default. And what it requires, in this case, is in the case of overdue payables, is to give the club a written notice and a deadline of at least 10 days. So if that deadline is issued and the club fails to fulfill its obligation, then the club will be in dispute and you can actually succeed in your claim. But without that, it's a fundamental requirement. Without that, such a claim cannot be successful. So while one might have a legitimate grievance, because of such procedural failings, there might be challenges in enforcing, in being successful, as it were. Also, in the case, another example of such procedural requirements is a case of terminating contracts for just cause where they are unpaid salaries. The FIFA regulations allow a player, as it were, where he's been owed for more than 2 months, to lawfully terminate his contract. But procedurally, the club also must be put in default with a notice and a deadline of at least 15 days. So in the process of resolving your disputes, there are some regulatory considerations that must be taken into account. You must know and apply to be successful in whatever claim or dispute that you have. Then another important thing is, like Funmi talked about, having a dispute resolution mechanism. Recall that we said FIFA requires it to be an independent tribunal. In the UK, for instance, they have Sports Resolution UK as an independent body that provides dispute resolution services for sports. LACCIAC also has similar, offerings. And I'm aware that the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, in collaboration with the Ministry of Youth and Sport, is working towards the actualization of a National Court of Arbitration for Sports in Nigeria. Let me be positive and say, when this is established, you would have a system where disputes that are resolved internally can be appealed to such an independent tribunal, and also for commercial disputes. Because, for instance, if a club has a dispute with its sponsor or its partner, such a forum will serve the purpose of sports-specific dispute resolution. So it is important that we have, beyond the internal mechanism within football, have an independent, sports-specific dispute resolution tribunal, such as a National Court of Arbitration for Sports. I think this is the much we can take now. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We'll have Udo Seckelmann, who will be giving us a brief presentation on the topic, how football disputes are resolved in Brazil and the South America region. Udo.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Before approaching this topic in question, I will give a brief overview of the South American and Brazilian clubs so you can understand our current situation and where we stand at. First of all, clubs in Brazil, they are drowning in debts. So the financial situation of most actually South American clubs are not so good, especially due to decades of poor and outdated management. So we can say that around 95% of Brazilian clubs, for example, have a hard time to control their finances, what creates a very weak bargaining position vis-a-vis, for example, international buying clubs, European clubs, for example, who wants to sign their players. Second of all, football in South America in general is still a very political environment. So sometimes personal interests overcome the club's interests. So financial obligations might be postponed depending on the internal political situation of the club. For example, if the election of the new president is approaching, the current president might choose to sign a good player instead of paying all debts, because that would help him to get re-elected. And the last of all, that doesn't apply only to football, but in Brazil in general, we have a very litigious culture. So sometimes the parties, they enter into a contract already expecting to seek judicial measures to have their rights respected. So this is a brief overview. That being said, what are the forums that we can bring a football dispute in Brazil? Historically, Brazil could be divided before the 90s in terms of football dispute resolution in state courts and sports justice. Okay, state courts, they deal with labor civil matters involving football. However, the state courts in Brazil, they are quite bureaucratic, overloaded and slow. On the other hand, of course, as you all know, football proceedings, they demand quickness in the resolution of their disputes, especially when the subject affects the competition. And also because of the brief duration of the player's career, who cannot wait years, 5 years, 10 years for a final decision to be rendered. And the other one is the sports justice. That is an independent justice in Brazil, protected by the federal constitution, with jurisdiction to adjudicate in matters related specifically to sports competition and disciplinary matters. After the 90s, a radical change happened in Brazil that I like to call the multi-door system era comes to scene. That era is when the ADR, the alternative dispute resolution, start to grow in Brazil effectively. Other options to solve football disputes. So in more or less in 1996, Brazil has enacted its arbitration law. So that was a radical change in Brazil, since for decades, Brazil was reluctant to resign state jurisdiction by permitting arbitration in every matter, not only in football. More or less at the same time in the 90s, FIFA starts to issue its first regulations and create their judicial bodies to deal with disputes with international dimension. In the years 2000, FIFA established CAS as an appeal body for their decisions. And 5 years ago, Brazil, CBF, the Brazilian Association, created a national DRC to solve their disputes between players, coaches, clubs, agents, regarding matters of employment, transfers, commercial, disciplinary nature, which has been very well accepted in Brazilian football. There's an interesting graphic that I don't have here, unfortunately, but the growth of cases in the national DRC of CBF is very similar to the growth of cases of CAS throughout the years when it was recognized as an appeal body for FIFA decisions. So we can see a relevant evolution in terms of alternatives to dispute resolution in football in Brazil. Now we have sports justice, state courts, arbitration, mediation that unfortunately is not very well, not so much used in Brazil due to the litigious culture that I said before, FIFA judicial bodies for disputes of international dimension, and the CBF DRC, which includes an appeal body that is also an arbitration tribunal very well recognized in Brazil. So we can see a very big evolution in the past 2 or 3 decades. Brazil grew a lot in terms of options for dispute resolution in football. So that being said, to which forum should we bring a football dispute in Brazil? As Kelvin said before, the short answer for this is depends. You have to, first of all, as Kelvin said, you have to hire a good lawyer. So as a sports lawyer, you have to choose the most appropriate forum for that dispute, take into account your client's interests. For example, that you have to analyze aspects such as Roberto said, the jurisprudence of the forum of CAS, for example. You have to analyze the parties for the potential dispute, if the forum has competence to deal with the dispute, and if it has a functional enforcement mechanism to enforce the decision if it's not complied with. You have to analyze the costs for those proceedings and the financial condition of your client. We have to consider, for example, bringing a claim or an appeal to CAS can be quite expensive if your client is not in a very comfortable financial situation. So you have to maybe choose another forum. On the other hand, if your client needs quickness to solve a matter and is willing to pay the costs, then arbitration could be a better option if he's willing to pay the expensive costs. As I said, the enforcement mechanism has to be very, very functional. It's a crucial topic because enforcing a decision that could impose sanctions such as the deduction of points or even the relegation of the club in the national championship can put a higher pressure for the compliance of the decision rather than if you seek the state courts and ask for the seizure of the assets, the seizure of their properties. Okay, and another aspect that has to be taken into account is the expertise of the judges. That is crucial, that is vital for every football dispute, because state court judges, as you all know, they're usually not ready to deal with high complexity football disputes. They usually don't know terms like TMS, ITC, DRC, TPO, bridge transfers, sell-on clauses, solidarity mechanism, training compensation, and etc. Therefore, bringing disputes to the DRCs, either national or international, allows a more uniform implementation of the jurisprudence and the sporting regulations for that matter. So these are some aspects that you have to analyze before bringing a football dispute to Brazil. So the final question is, are those alternatives effective to solve football disputes in Brazil? Mostly yes. Sometimes it can be slow in some disputes, but most football disputes in Brazil are resolved eventually. But the big problem, as I said before, in my opinion, is the access to justice. Justice can be quite expensive, either if you want to pay the costs to lodge a claim in an arbitration tribunal or to hire a lawyer for that matter. So it can be, the access of justice is something to be revealed for all the stakeholders. But in conclusion, considering all the forums that I said before and taking into account the aspects that I said, choosing the jurisdiction for a football dispute is crucial, especially when drafting a contract, as Kelvin said very well before, and establishing the parties' obligations, the limits for their obligation, and etc. That's why hiring a good lawyer is essential to advise his clients, not only to resolve disputes that arise in football, but also to prevent those disputes from arising.
All right, thank you very, very much. That's a wonderful presentation from you, Udo. It's evident that what Brazilian clubs are passing through, that same what is obtainable in Nigeria and various parts of Africa. So let's just quickly move to Tosin. And Tosin, you have 10 minutes. Yeah, Tosin will be speaking on the arbitration in football, the rules of FIFA, DRC. Tosin, you have the floor. Thank you. Tosin, you have to unmute yourself. Okay, I think you have been muted. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tosin, like I earlier said. I'll be speaking on the role of FIFA's Player Status Committee and Dispute Resolution Chamber. So FIFA actually has two judicial bodies, as the FIFA Player Status Committee and the Dispute Resolution Chamber. But before I go on to that, I would actually want to talk about what matters does FIFA have jurisdiction on. And that can be seen in, that is contained in Article 22 of the regulations on the status and transfer of players. And one of such matters is disputes between clubs and players in respect of contractual stability and international transfer certificate. So when there's a dispute in respect of maybe as the contract of the player expired, whether a player is supposed to be issued an ITC or a transfer between a club in a particular country to a club in another country, then such matters fall within the ambit of matters which the FIFA judicial bodies should handle. Also, according to Article 22B of the RSTP, where there's an employment-related dispute between a club and a player of international dimension, FIFA also has jurisdiction in respect of such matters. To the same football association. So for instance, if there's a dispute between a German coach and let's say a South African club, such a matter is a matter of international dimension because the coach being a German and the club being a club affiliated with the South African Football Association do not belong to the same football association, and it qualifies as a matter of, as a case of international dimension. Although, where there's an independent arbitration tribunal at the national level, let's say in South Africa, there's an independent arbitration tribunal, and that contract between the club and the coach, the German coach, has a clear reference to that tribunal. That's one. And where such a tribunal can guarantee fair hearing and there's equal representation of players and clubs, then FIFA may not be able to exercise jurisdiction. So in that circumstance, where the contract refers to such a national arbitration body and it can guarantee fair hearing, there's equal representation of players and clubs, then such a matter may be heard by the national arbitration body. But in the absence of such, where such a national arbitration body cannot meet such requirements, then FIFA would exercise jurisdiction. Another matter which the judicial bodies of FIFA also have power to adjudicate over is employment-related disputes between a club and an association, then that of a player. So if there is a dispute between a player and a club, or maybe if there's a dispute between a player and a club of international dimension, then FIFA will be able to adjudicate. So similar to the other example which was earlier given, let's say the player is a Ghanaian player, and the dispute is with a Nigerian club, then such a dispute can be heard by FIFA, provided that there is no national arbitration tribunal, which is referred to in the contract, and which can guarantee fair hearing and has equal representation of players and coaches. Also, disputes relating to training compensation and solidarity mechanism between clubs that belong to different associations. If a Nigerian club, for instance, has a claim against maybe a club in, let's say, England, in respect of training compensation that is due to that club in Nigeria, or maybe solidarity mechanism payment that is due to the club in Nigeria, then FIFA would have jurisdiction to hear such a dispute. And that is as stated in Article 22, paragraph D of the FIFA regulations on the status and transfer of players. Going further, where there's a dispute relating to training compensation and solidarity mechanism between clubs that belong to the same association, but provided that the origin of such a dispute has to do with an international transfer, So if there's, for instance, a dispute between two Nigerian clubs, but the transfer is as regards the transfer of maybe, let's say, a player in Nigeria to a club, let's say, in Portugal, and the dispute borders on training compensation, who is entitled to training compensation in respect of that player or solidarity mechanism payment, then FIFA would also have jurisdiction. Finally, disputes between clubs belonging to different associations, but which do not fall within the cases that I've mentioned in Article 22, Paragraph A, Article 22, Paragraph D, and Article 22, Paragraph E of the FIFA regulations on the status and of players, FIFA would also be able to have jurisdiction. So in those 6 circumstances, FIFA has jurisdiction. Now, FIFA has 2 decision-making bodies that handle such disputes, which are the Player Status Committee and the Dispute Resolution Chamber. And these matters have been, would I say, assigned to different bodies, whether the PSC or the DRC. So if there's an employment-related dispute between a club and an association and a coach of an international dimension, then it's the Player Status Committee that has jurisdiction. If it's that of a dispute between a club and a player of international dimension, then it's the Dispute Resolution Chamber that has jurisdiction. Because of our time, I will not be able to list which particular bodies have jurisdiction at time, let's say the PSC or DRC, but that can be seen under Article 22 of the RSTP. So apart from those disputes that have been mentioned, it's very important to make sure that, we need to consider which parties can actually bring disputes before the FIFA Player Status Committee. It's not every party that can bring a dispute before the Player Status Committee of FIFA. And now, the parties which can bring dispute before the Player Status Committee of FIFA are member associations of FIFA. For instance, let's say the Nigerian Football Federation, the South African Football Association, and the rest of them. These are member associations and they can bring such disputes. Also, clubs can be parties before these judicial decision-making bodies. So whether a professional club or an amateur club, they are admissible parties before FIFA. Now, sports marketing companies cannot be parties before FIFA. Sports broadcasting companies, sports equipment companies, sportswear manufacturing companies cannot be parties before FIFA. It wouldn't matter whether they do businesses which are related to football or that in the football industry, but they cannot be parties. Also, players are admissible parties. And for players, sometimes people have the notion that amateur players can't have their disputes brought before the decision-making bodies of FIFA, but that is not the case. So whether professional players or amateur players, they are admissible parties before FIFA. Also, coaches are admissible parties before FIFA. Then finally, licensed match agents are admissible parties before FIFA. Now, there's something which I usually mention to clients and whenever I have an opportunity to speak. In Nigeria, the limitation period of bringing disputes before the regular courts is quite different from that of FIFA. So, for instance, in Nigeria, talking about single contracts, we'll be talking about a period of 6 years. The disputes can be brought within a period of 6 years. But in respect of disputes that have to be brought before the FIFA Player Status Committee or Dispute Resolution Chamber, that has to be done within 2 years from when such cause of action arose. And that is contained in Article 25, Paragraph 5 of the RSTP. So it is very important where a party has any grievance, maybe against a club or maybe against a player, that such a dispute is tabled before the decision-making bodies of FIFA within 2 years. Then, in respect of cost, it has contained in the RSTP. There are some cases, there are some matters that a party would not be required to pay costs, and there's some other matters that a party would be required to pay costs. For instance, disputes that attract no cost, where the dispute is in respect of provisional registration of players, and it attracts no cost. Employment-related disputes between clubs and players also attract no cost. But there are disputes that attract cost, and such matters are proceedings before the Player Status Committee, all the matters which the Player Status Committee have jurisdiction, except disputes of provisional registration. In other words, it's only disputes that have to do with provisional registration of players for the Player Status Committee that do not attract cost. For every other one, proceedings before the Player Status Committee attract cost. Also, proceedings before the Dispute Resolution Chamber as regards training compensation and solidarity mechanism attract cost. And during this COVID-19 period, I would like to mention that FIFA actually released a COVID-19 regulation whereby disputes during this period, I can't particularly lay hands to the date now, but disputes submitted before the decision-making bodies of FIFA during this period would actually not attract costs. Finally, I would want to talk about enforcement of such decisions. So when FIFA gives such decisions, the sanctions are usually contained in their decisions. In a case where maybe a club is demanded to make a payment to another club, or demanded to make a payment to a player who has been under its employment, where such decisions are given, the sanctions are usually included as well, and parties are usually required to comply. So let me note that decisions of FIFA are actually not enforceable before civil courts. They are usually enforced within the internal bodies of FIFA. In a circumstance where a party is not pleased with the decision which has been given, there's an opportunity to appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and that has to be done within a period of 21 days from when the full decision is transmitted to the parties. So that's in respect of the role that FIFA has to play in respect of dispute resolution. So it's very important to know when a matter falls within that FIFA can advocate over, and when it falls within, when a matter is not such that FIFA can advocate over. Thank you. Hello?
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Now we are going to move to reaction segment, whereby we have the likes of Amobi Ezeaku, Barrister Victoria Nlemigbo, Gbenga Global, and Eddie Ogbemudia to react to these three presentations. Eddie, what's your reaction?
Yeah, for the three presentations so far, I must say emphasis is on enforcement, and just like Kelvin highlighted when he spoke, there are processes that have already been laid down by FIFA. There are things the domestic FA just need to domesticate, or let me say adopt, so that they can see how these things are working. Like in Nigeria, for instance, if you have dispute between clubs and a Nigerian citizen, you will see that that dispute will linger on irrespective of where they take it to. For example, if it is a foreign player that is representing that particular club in Nigeria, and that case is taken to FIFA, within a short time, there is a resolution and there are mandates to pay whatever compensation. And you see all these clubs running head-to-head, pay millions of naira to some foreigners. But it's unfortunate that we really don't have a national dispute resolution chamber, and also the player status committee that have been in existence, that have not been in existence for a long time now in Nigeria, which is affecting the average footballer. Now, talking about alternative way or alternative dispute resolution chamber like the LACCIAC we mentioned earlier, as Kelvin also stated, if some of all these are contained in the contract, we can use that avenue to resolve this dispute instead of waiting for forever. The LMC as a regulatory body really does not really have to take over that role of resolving dispute between players, but because of the non-existence of anybody to handle those things, that is why we are having those issues. Now, let me move quickly to Udo because of the time they're giving. Udo actually made mention of some of the challenges they are passing through, and over time, some of these regulations that FIFA advised domestic club or a member FAs, they actually adopted them, and now they have the dispute resolution chamber in their country and also in South America. Some of all these things, though dispute arises, but there are mechanisms to see how all these are sorted. Then a quick reaction to Tosin's presentation. Honestly, the grassroots clubs is only in the aspect of training compensation and solidarity mechanism they can't be benefiting from training these players. And it's unfortunate that some of all these players, they will travel and they will make some good moves, and some of them, it's difficult for them to pursue their cases of solidarity mechanism and training compensation. Some of them, some money has only gone because the window is short, and some of them, because of lack of information, they will not even be aware that their players have made the move and they will need to lay claim to what is due to them. So it's quite unfortunate. And another basic thing is that there is lack of documentation. Like we've had some cases whereby some grassroots club will say, okay, this player actually played for me for some time, but okay, where's the license? Here's the document to prove that it actually is your player. Unfortunately, some of these grassroots clubs, they don't really have documents to present to lay claim to this player. That's why they are losing out in some of these cases, or they don't even have the basis to fight for some of these cases. But on the final note, I would say, especially as a form of a community arising from this conference, is to see how we can bring all stakeholders together and make NFF understand the reason why some of these judiciary body need to exist and function properly, independently in Nigeria. Thank you.
Barrister Nlemigbo, your reaction, please.
Good afternoon again. It's very important to note as we speak that the football has both international and the national aspect of it, and is an international business, and it has domestication aspect. Whatever we discuss here, as long as the authorities in charge of football in each country does not take its time to domesticate the rules and regulations of FIFA, we shall continue to have these issues of not resolving problems. For instance, we have in Nigeria the Player Status Committee that was set up, but it does set up on paper and it doesn't function. So how do you, after going through the dispute resolution and reaching positions and they are not implemented, it continues to go around in circles and then hurt the system. And we're looking at LMC being burdened with a lot of responsibilities, which statutorily they don't they are not supposed to be, because LMC is a limited liability company and certain individuals have interest in LMC. For instance, the club, the league managers and the owners of the clubs are all congregated under LMC. That means their interest first. And there's hardly any way the player's interest can be protected when you are responsible for the suffering of the player, you are also responsible for taking a decision in the interest of the player. That is, a cock and bull situation. So we have to, when we are investing our time here like this, we have to look at critical situations. What exactly do we need to do as a group, as a people, to ensure that we bring about solutions at country and the association levels? Are the countries, those responsible for taking care of this or implementing decisions that have been taken, are they ready and willing to implement? Where they are not willing to implement, what are the other solutions available for somebody who is suffering this ill? And in this circumstance, most times it's the players. The players are hungry, the players are desperate, the players are willing to jump into anything as long as they have opportunity to play. It's when they have settled in, they now realize, this thing is big, or why didn't I look at this and that and that? So it boils down to education. Even FIFA at its own level should institute training programs and sessions for players so that they will understand what they are going into, what they need to do, who should be with them, who should back them up, and all the T's and I's crossed and dotted. That way we will have less and less reasons to look for solutions, because from ab initio the solutions will be built in, and that will prevent the problem from arising. But when they arise, we must find strong agents and willingness to resolve them and solve them. And the players are so badly exposed. And, the coaches are also exposed. But my concern as a member of a players union and as a lawyer as well is that the players who are so terribly exposed are, helped to understand that they actually hold the key. If, for instance, in Nigeria, where I am and where I belong, you are owing players 6 months salary, 7 months salary, and even the local rule says if a club is owing players 3 months salary, that club should not and cannot be registered to play the domestic season. But we find situations where the club will accumulate several months salary and then disband the players, send them away, recruit new ones, and continue as if nothing has happened. And nobody bothers to ask, okay, you are doing this, you have faulted, you are at default in this and that. Why will I now allow you to register? So we need to bring this thing down home and look at the nitty.
Udo Seckelmann and my friend Tosin. And I would like to pick it up from where my colleague, Barrister Victoria, stopped. I was a member of the defunct NFF Arbitration Committee, and on several occasions, we made attempts to get this committee to sit. But then people will always say the African factor or the Nigerian factor. But I think it shouldn't apply in football, because football is an entity of its own. Be that as it may, this could still be our morning. This could still be a time for us to think deep and look inwards towards the actualization of our dream of a dispute-free footballing family. Well, disputes will always arise. Like Tosin said, most club managers don't understand what the TMS is all about, for instance. They don't understand why they have to issue a TPO, for instance. They don't know the meaning of these things. And Seckelmann also agrees with this fact, and it boils down to education. If we don't get educated through and through, if the players don't understand the need for them to know the contents of their contract, if club managers don't understand that they have roles to play on the FIFA platform that is talking about the transfer matching system, if they don't understand that they are under an obligation to issue the third-party notice, the TPO, if they don't understand that they are duty-bound to ensure that once they are in breach of the statutes regulating the game, that they must abide by the awards given by either the domestic dispute resolution chambers, the arbitration committee. Like Eddie said, down here, we want to always fidget when it is coming from CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sports. We want to run around and make sure that we fulfill these awards given by CAS. But I want to say that that shouldn't be the case. Charity, they say, begins at home. We must mend the system here. The system must be strengthened. I am happy that there are people close to the authorities at the Nigerian Football Federation. And I say, without mincing words, that we have over 5,000 matters, over 5,000 players who need justice. They don't have access to this justice. These players need justice, but I can't give them this justice. They need justice, but Tosin can't give them this justice. This justice will come to them when the arbitration committee of the Nigerian Football Federation is strengthened, when the arbitration panel do not choose the matters they have to hear. These matters must be listed, and then when an award is given, it must be enforced. Kudos to the LMC, because the last season some clubs were barred from registering players, but that shouldn't be their job. That shouldn't be their job, because they are limited in this instance. The Nigerian Football Federation and the national associations to FIFA, the Ghana Football Association, the South African Football Association, and all other football federations should put these things in place. I am happy to hear that the situation here is similar to that in Brazil, but then in Brazil, they now have their national dispute resolution chambers. We do not have that in Nigeria. And in my master's dissertation, I was of the opinion that to minimize the level of disputes in the country when it comes to football, that we must enthrone, we must empower a national dispute resolution chambers. And in one of my comments in Nairobi, during one of the CAF conferences I attended, I was also of the opinion that we must at all points look at the African situation. If we feel that we cannot have an outlook like that of CAS, we should take a leap, for instance, from what happens in South Africa. South Africa has a smooth means of resolving football disputes. Then we must solve the African problem with an African solution. If we feel that it is expensive to bring about a functional CAS in the real sense of CAS, if we feel that we cannot do what FIFA could do towards resolving sports dispute or football dispute because of the finances involved, then we should bring the African solution in. What is the African solution? The African solution is about social dialogue, because no matter how we want to look at this, we want to get to the end of the tunnel. And the end of this tunnel is resolving these disputes and making sure that the player is happy, the club is happy, and the fans are happy. I tell you this, in 2014, I represented players at the Nigerian Football Federation Players Status and Arbitration Committee. I did that matter pro bono. So Udo, you spoke about these players being unable to pay. I did that matter free of charge for them. But the irony was that when they got their money, they forgot their lawyer. And that becomes a terrible thing. And I think that is why most lawyers now are so, they are a hard nut to crack. But my advice always is this: if you have a matter and the player is impecunious, you can have a memorandum of understanding that when this matter ends, 10% of the award goes to the lawyer. Again, I would like to say that majority of the issues in Africa is about contract termination, inability to pay or to abide by financial obligations. How then do we curb this situation? Club owners, club managers should ensure that they are not under pressure to sign players. I know some club managers, when they need a player, they can promise the player heaven and earth. But when the chips are down, for you to fulfill this contractual obligation, you are nowhere to be found. So you shouldn't put yourself under pressure. Then to players, the rule is clear. A player must not be there to negotiate his contract. You can send your lawyer, you can send your intermediary, and that's why there is an intermediary regulation instituted by FIFA. When these players are educated and they understand these principles, these disputes will be minimized. I am not advocating that disputes should be extinguished totally, because when you extinguish disputes totally, sports lawyers like Barrister Kelvin, like Tosin, like Udo Seckelmann would be doing nothing. So in a nutshell, I think I'm timing myself, I have about a minute. I charge not only the Nigerian Football Federation, I know that FIFA has that coercive power. FIFA can say we are giving national associations 1 month to make sure that they establish their means of dispute resolution, to make sure that they domesticate these things. And I tell you, there are salient articles in the FIFA statute, in the regulation on the status and transfer of players that must be domesticated in all national associations. Article 12 BIS, for instance, must be domesticated, hook, line, and sinker. I once argued with an official of the LMC. I said, you've said 3 months. That is not what FIFA says. FIFA says if you have overdues payable for 1 month and you give notice, then you have a course of action. That article in the regulation of the league management company has to go in line with the Article 12 BIS of the regulation on the status and transfer of players. So in a nutshell, apart from educating players, we must also educate clubs to understand that transfer is a very significant and vital issue, that activities on the FIFA transfer matching system are also necessary because they are the lifeline and life wire of every player. They are the alpha and omega of resolving these disputes because all contractual documents are uploaded to the FIFA database so that there won't be any need anymore for a player to say, I do not have my contract. These contracts are with FIFA. These contracts are stamped with FIFA. These contracts are sealed with FIFA. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Amobi, I feel your passion. Because of your passion, you've taken a lot of our time. But I will just quickly move to the next section where we have Funmi, who will be speaking on the role of LACCIAC in dispute resolution. I just want to appeal to all participants. This meeting was scheduled to terminate by 12:30. But we still just have some few topics to talk about, so we just have about 30 minutes a section. Please just pardon us for the time. Thank you. Funmi.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm actually going to be sharing a slide presentation because I want to explain what we do at LACCIAC. But listening to everyone, I'm beginning to feel like a savior because everyone is calling for options in to the sports industry. So I'll share the slide, what the Lagos Chamber of Commerce International Arbitration Center does in terms of dispute resolution and how we provide solutions to commercial disputes. I say commercial disputes because, as you have all mentioned, at the end of the day, sports, we're talking about sports business, not just the love or soccer or, you know, badminton or whatever else. It's a business. And because it's a business, the disputes that arise are commercial in nature. And the other thing I'd like to say is, while LACCIAC is not a sports dispute resolution center, as you guys have been talking about, but then it's a dispute resolution center that is focused on, it's very industry specific. So, you know, we have neutrals that have expertise in sports disputes, just as we have neutrals that have expertise in oil and gas, in construction, maritime, finance. So, you know, if you make a reference to LACCIAC, your neutrals, if it's an arbitration or mediation, will be experts like Kelvin, for instance, who, you know, not only have dispute resolution training, but also have the requisite industry experience. So I'll just share the slide now. Thank you. It says host disabled participants screen sharing. I have mentioned that I'll be sharing a slide. Is someone able to enable?
Okay, just hold a little. On mic will be back, and we enable that immediately. Mic will be back. Okay, just a few minutes.
All right. While I wait, this scheme I want to share with you. It's a scheme that LACCIAC has come up with to support businesses during this COVID-19 pandemic. It's actually geared towards providing cheaper, that's a word that you guys have mentioned, faster and effective dispute resolution solutions to businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. Now, your disputes that we're discussing here, sports disputes, may not necessarily be related to, you know, or be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Some may not. But the scope of the scheme is one that you can take advantage of whether or not your dispute is directly as a result of the impact of the pandemic on your contractual transaction. The aim of the scheme essentially is to provide access to justice to businesses at this point that we know have limited cash to spend in prosecuting claims. We have come up with this scheme to encourage parties to continue to seek alternative means of dispute resolution, because we know, for instance, that in Nigeria, the courts have been locked down for a long time, and then even courts that are sitting are only sitting for what they consider to be to what they consider to be, you know, cases that need to be heard, you know, at the moment. Otherwise, your case is on some back burner. Is this okay? It's still okay. I'm able to share now. Okay, I don't know what this is. I'll just I'm still not, this is not my slide. I'm not sure what this is, but maybe I should just go on.
All right, just go on. I don't know, maybe
yes. Okay, so LACCIAC implements a KEDRI scheme. The KEDRI is an acronym for the COVID-19 ADR initiative, and it is a scheme designed to support businesses given the adverse economic impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our economy as a whole. So what we do through KEDRI is we provide cheaper, speedier, and effective resolution of contractual and other disputes through the use of ADR mechanisms: arbitration, mediation, expert determination, adjudication, early neutral evaluation, or a combination of these methods as may be required. How do you access, I mean, what's the scope of the scheme? So we've spoken a lot here today about the need to have contracts. Parties have to agree to submit their reference or their dispute to the Kadrai scheme under, LACCIAC for you to be able to take advantage of the scheme. So one is the parties have agreed to submit the dispute for resolution under the Kadrai scheme. So you have a contract that you actually say, and let's just note that you may not necessarily have said that in your employment agreement or whatever other type of transactions you have. But then when a dispute arises, if both parties are minded to get a resolution, they can agree at that point that, you know what, let us submit this dispute to the Kadrai scheme under LACCIAC. Now, sometimes you have a situation where you have already provided for a dispute resolution mechanism in your contract. It may be that you even say that the state courts have jurisdiction. It may be that you've provided for CAS. And I know it's been mentioned here that, not everyone has the financial stamina to sometimes go through proceedings at CAS. So if the parties agree, despite the fact that their contract already provides for some other dispute resolution mechanism, they can agree when the dispute arises, and because there is now the scheme that available, and say, okay, we will opt out of what was provided in the contract, and we will now refer this dispute to LACCIAC to be determined under the Kadrai scheme. It could also be under this is the third scenario, that you actually have a case in court. I think it's Mr. Amobi who had talked about 5,000 cases. I'm not sure whether there are 5,000 court cases, but you could have a case in court that is going nowhere, and then it's even worse now because the courts are not sitting. So the parties can agree to have the matter in court stayed, right, and then refer that dispute that was in court to resolution under the Kadrai scheme by LACCIAC. So those are the three scenarios. You agree by contract to submit your dispute. You agree by contract that regardless of what we had already agreed to in terms of dispute resolution mechanism, we now say, let's try Kadrai.
Unfortunately, it's like
Sorry? Oh, yeah. Did you lose me?
I think we can hear now. We can hear
for a while?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Now, so, all right. So like I was saying, the scheme, both parties must consent to referring the dispute to the Kadrai scheme. Now, when the parties agree that, okay, I've heard about this Kadrai, I understand that it's cheap, I understand that they will attempt to have the dispute resolution process extremely affordable. Sometimes the parties do not actually have, and they do not exactly know what dispute resolution mechanism that they're opting for. So they know that, yes, we want to come to LACCIAC, we don't want to go to court. But however, there are various options when you come to LACCIAC. There is mediation, there's arbitration, like I said, there's early neutral evaluation. Sometimes you just want an expert to make a determination as to a particular issue, right? And there isn't even any financial implication to the dispute. So when you approach LACCIAC, and there are forms that you fill if you want to come to Kadrai, all these are available on the LACCIAC website, and I can be contacted. Mr. Michael has my contact details, but if you visit LACCIAC.org, you would find all this information there. The LACCIAC Secretariat can advise the parties that, okay, you want to come to LACCIAC, do you want to have this dispute resolved under you want it to be resolved by mediation or arbitration? So we have that discussion with the parties, assuming they have not made that decision already. If they've made the decision already, then they go past that first step. If they haven't, you have that discussion with the LACCIAC Secretariat to determine the best method for resolving the disputes that they seek to refer. Now, so once that decision has been made as to the method, the submission agreement has been completed and filed, LACCIAC then enters into a second phase of discussions with the parties, and this is with respect to agreeing on a budget for the process. So under our regular dispute resolution process, we have a scale of fees, and the scale of fees is basically ad valorem, meaning if you have a claim for 2 million naira, or it's a value of that claim, and there's a whole scale. But under the CADRI scheme, affordable is the basis for the scheme. So we speak to the parties, interact with the parties to agree on what it is they can afford, what is your budget. Now, back end as a secretariat, we have a whole pool of neutrals that have committed and pledged their time to support this scheme by providing their services as a huge discount when they are available and there's no conflict. So these are experts that you would normally be paying huge amounts to, but because, like I said, the idea of the scheme is to stimulate economic activities, encourage business transactions, in view of the fact that there's the pandemic has really stifled activities. LACCIAC as a secretariat plus this whole pool of neutrals are committed to providing discounted services. So once we agree on the budget, the secretariat then seeks out a suitable neutral. So this is a sports dispute, for instance. So we'll be contacting neutrals on our sports panel of neutrals that have committed or have pledged to support the scheme by providing discounted services. And then, like I said, when they are available and if there's no conflict. So we go through the list, we speak to neutrals, and we're able to arrive at 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that that are available, to provide their neutral services for the dispute. That list is then provided to the parties to choose which mediator or arbitrator, whatever it is the mechanism that they would rather have. Now, where the parties are unable to make that choice, still based on this list of neutrals who have agreed that, oh yes, I'm available to provide my service at this amount, LACCIAC can make that choice for the parties, right? Once we go through the budget phase and then the appointment phase, and like I said, you must just bear this in mind, that the fact that it's affordable and it's based on the party's budgets, right, which is contrary to regular schedule of fees, does not mean that you're getting any less in terms of the expertise of the mediator, because these are actual neutrals who are listed on the LACCIAC panel of neutrals, but they have committed time to support the scheme, essentially. Once the neutral is appointed, the relevant LACCIAC rules, if it's an arbitration, if it's a mediation, if the relevant rules now come into play. So the purpose of the scheme is essentially to ensure that you get your proceedings at a discount, I don't know, some form of legal aid, so to speak, but then it is still a process under the LACCIAC rules. So if it's an arbitration, it will be conducted under the arbitration rules of LACCIAC. If it's a mediation, and going forward, it will then be conducted. And at that point, going forward, really, it's just essentially a LACCIAC process. You go through the process, you get to the end. If it's an award, you have the award. It's enforced as any other award. If it's a settlement arising from a mediation, LACCIAC will support the process of ensuring that the settlement is entered into a judgment in the state courts. So in summary, that's the process. It's one that we hope will encourage parties or encourage businesses not to sit, on claims because they don't have the funds to pursue them, and they're able to then approach us, and we will work with you to go through your dispute resolution process at the budget that is affordable to you, essentially. I'll share the slides with Michael, and he can share with everyone here.
Thank you, Funmi. Thank you for your time. Now, let's hear from Roberto in a few minutes before he left.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I will have to try to make it short because I'm actually running late now for an important meeting also that I had scheduled after this event with a certain amount of buffering concerning time. So it took some 15 minutes extra, but I think everyone is so interested in the topic that we took a little bit longer, but that's no problem. But then I have to try to be quick and leave after my talk, so there will be no room for a Q&A. So I'm sorry for that. I was asked to look critically at the situation in relation to the payment of solidarity contributions to African clubs. Basically, this is an issue that is currently also under the reconstruction by FIFA concerning the reform of the transfer system in general. As you all are most probably aware of, FIFA is currently carrying out this very extensive reform of the transfer system in various areas, of which the solidarity payments is one. The other ones being loans, the transfer system in general concerning international movement, and the agency business, as you are all probably aware of, and where AFA also has a lot to do with. But that's for another day. If I look at the solidarity payments, we see that up until now, the current system has created a couple of problems that have made it difficult for African clubs to try to really receive the funds in relation to training the players and for the solidarity payments. There are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, in my personal experience, I see that a reason for a lack of receiving solidarity payments is an unclarity of the training from the side of training clubs. Maybe from administrative purposes, it's difficult to find the right people to claim the amounts in a proper way, but also in relation to the structure of the clubs, because many times you see training clubs wanting to receive solidarity payments, but then it turns out that this club is not a proper structured club in the sense of the FIFA transfer matching system or the national FA system in general, because these clubs are basically academies with no link to a specific football club. So there you see the difficulty. So even if a European club would like to pay the amount of solidarity contribution, and sometimes it's difficult to identify what the right club is. And if you have consulted an agent or a club in the transfer of the player, but later you find out that it's not like a proper club, but it's academy connected not to the football system, then it will be difficult to claim solidarity contribution if it will be possible at all. So that's one issue. The other issue is obviously the difficulty with the current system, and that is the fact that in an ideal world, the club would have, the buying club would have a proactive role in finding out what clubs would be entitled to receive that solidarity contribution. Well, that's quite difficult to impose on clubs because they have to have a proactive role, and sometimes it's easier just to await till someone knocks on your door to claim for the payment of the compensation. And it might take quite a long time before you will actually have to pay the compensation. So I see that as a big problem of the current system. If I am an African club and I see that one of my players has transferred in Europe, and you see a consecutive transfer in Europe, and you would like to receive the solidarity contribution that you're entitled to receive, and the club has a lack of a proactive role to contact you, then basically you need to do a lot of work. First, you need to inform the national FA or the international FA where the player is playing concerning the player passports, because you need to find out what the exact dates are concerning the movement of the various movements of the player. Then if the club does not respond, you identify the club, but the club does not respond, what happens? Now, as an African club, you need to put time and money into trying to enforce your right to solidarity contribution. So how does that work, that enforcement? Eventually, you would even have to go to FIFA to start a case, because in many situations, clubs, when asked for the first time, they don't give you all the information that is necessary. Or maybe sometimes that you give you half of the information by leaving out maybe payments concerning bonuses or other premiums or sell-on clauses that could have an impact on the payment of the actual transfer fee, and as such also an impact on the amount of solidarity contribution that you're going to receive. So you're also depending on the club to give you the right information. And that's quite difficult, because if the club doesn't give you the right information, eventually you need to start a case. Well, if you look at the amounts of money involved in starting a case, you see that there are between 1,000 and 5,000 Swiss francs was the whole situation to pay as legal costs towards FIFA to start a specific case. Well, then we all know what happens. You can not receive the grounds of the case. Then you have to continue with litigation. It will take a long time before you will see that you can actually force a club to pay solidarity contribution. Eventually, clubs will pay, because if you follow the right track, it might take 1 or 2 years before you can actually execute that entitlement. And then clubs eventually will pay, because they're afraid that they will receive sanctions. And most importantly, the sanctions could be sporting sanctions. So you see that clubs eventually intend to pay. But that could be 1.5, 2 years later. And then you have already spent a lot of money, and the club that has not paid the amount at that time might be better off just to push that debt towards the future. So that is problematic, and it really asks for a different system. And we have seen now in the reforms that FIFA is really intending to come up with a new system. So we can't say too much about that, because we're obviously still waiting how this will operate in the future. So maybe in a couple of months or in a year's time, we could have a retrospective effect, and we could analyze if this system indeed has created some advantages in relation to the system that we have now. But what could be helpful, obviously, is greater transparency. Well, of all the payments that are involved in an international transfer, so or in a national transfer, which will lead to solidarity contribution to an African club. Transparency should be or could be something that is included in the intention of the creation of a clearinghouse by FIFA. So it's not 100% clear yet how that clearinghouse would look like, because they're in the developing phase of the clearinghouse at the moment. But you could ask for some additional transparency requirements in relation to solidarity compensation to be included in the clearinghouse system. What could also be possible in the clearinghouse system, if there is an a priori identification already of the clubs that have been involved in the training of the player, that at the moment that the clearinghouse effectuates a payment concerning a transfer, that there's already a deduction of the solidarity contribution. But that is something which might be a bridge too far already, due to all different kinds of reasons, especially the reasons that a third party, which FIFA de facto still is, could not claim amounts of money directly in payments between two parties. I think that could be very tricky to, well, it needs to be analyzed, but it would be quite tricky to implement without having a very solid analysis if you could actually intrude in payments between two parties like that, if it will not create to a situation where you diminish the freedom of doing business, and which is in many countries something which is actually a constitutional right. So if FIFA would like to stay out of those potential problems in relation to payment schedules, maybe it could open up a more transparent and more effective method of trying to ease up the whole procedures that would lead to enforcing your right to receive a solidarity payment. So we know the 12 bis procedure in the FIFA transfer system that's included in the transfer regulations. It could be possible to look at the entitlement to receive a a solidarity contribution, to look at it the same way as a sort of an overdue but payable. You know, so that could be easier for a club to attract the money and to enforce the entitlement to solidarity contribution with less hassle than going to a DRC or to a court of arbitration for sport. And maybe this procedure could be much easier, much more transparent, much more efficient, and could more quickly lead to sanctions, sporting sanctions, to clubs that do not live up to their duties when paying the solidarity contribution. So next to that, obviously, I come back to the first point I made. You have to be clear in the contracts that you conclude with the clubs, you know, to make clear when you sell a player from an African club to the first transferring club, that you also put in the contract the responsibility of that club whenever it makes a transfer to give you all the information connected to that transfer. So there will be no confidentiality in relation to that. There are contractual clauses you can include to make your life easier in that respect. Yes, looking also at the time, I think we have to be critical concerning that clearinghouse, make sure that all the clubs are involved in that clearinghouse, bring down also the costs of litigation, because some clubs have just difficulty to pay the amounts to go into litigation, to make a system that is more simple. Maybe look at a situation where clubs in a transfer are deducted automatically from that fee the amount of solidarity contribution. But foremost, I think it's also really necessary to make clear to the big clubs, especially in Europe, you know, the huge Champions League quarterfinalists or second round clubs, you know, the usual suspects, to make clear to them that to have a competitive balance is the most important thing in sports, to have in football in particular in this respect, to have smaller clubs that are able to train players and to bring players to our continent. You know, that structure should also be in place, and that is necessary to have competitive balance in order to maximize the profit of the spectacle. So that's what I wanted to say in a couple of minutes, to go down to this specific the nutshell of the issue. I hope that it was of help. And I'm really very sorry, I'm really running out of time. So Michael, if you have one question now, please ask. I could answer just one quickly, but then I really have to go. I'm sorry for that.
Reaction from Victoria and Amobi. Just 2 minutes from both of you.
It's only Victoria that is available now, so maybe she takes a reaction now.
Okay, Victoria, any reaction from your side? Okay, I think, Eddie, any reaction?
Just like Roberto said, emphasis on training compensation, the structure is very key. The existence as a football club, that's where you need to fight it up to the end. Currently, I'm actually working closely to identify some of these grassroots clubs that have some exceptional players in Europe. So here I can focus more on working in that line. But I believe Roberto has said it all. We need to put our house in order to get ready for such fight for compensation. And also have it in the back of our mind that it might take some time. It's not instant, because some of these clubs, they want to defer the payment to a future date. So with time, we'll get it right. That's just my little addition. Thank you.
Amobi, your reaction?
Yes, I would say that when you talk of training compensation, for instance, solidarity mechanism, we need to have a good understanding of this. And I think I will push it back to the Intermediary Association of Nigeria. You have a role to play here, because the clubs and the players don't know this all. This may seem so complex. You have to educate the clubs because the grassroots clubs should
Eddie, are you there?
So I'm here. It's like we lost.
Amobi there.
So let's move because of time.
Okay, let's move to reaction from the other participants.
All right. So if you have anything to say, just raise your hand, and Mike will call on you as we will bring this conference to a wrap. Please quickly, if you have anything to say, just raise your hand, please. Thank you. Master Abdullah, you can unmute yourself and speak, please.
Yeah, Fabiosa.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody.
No, sir. Hello?
Yeah, you are on.
Okay, can I go ahead now?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Great idea, great program. I just want to appreciate a very good program. But I think we can. As a matter of fact, FIFA did not start the way it is today. FIFA started from somewhere else, and some of this suggestion, some of this discussion here should be forwarded to some couple authorities, and by FIFA standard, we can also write as an individual to FIFA some things that are happening here, because really the grassroots teams are really suffering. Those who are really, they harness the talent, and I kudos to everybody, to the resource person, everybody. You have a great weekend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Promise.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Though I joined a bit late, but I have like a few questions. Maybe get clarification on something.
Okay.
I have this instance where the club, the grassroots club, which properly registers, has GMS and the rest of it, was moving a player to an elite club in the country, and in the process of registration, they had a few challenges and all that. At a point, we realized, because part of the agreement was that the transfer has to be through TMN, so that we can monitor further transactions and all that on the player. Now, at a point, we realized that somehow, I don't know what they did, but the player does not have this particular grassroots club history on his profile on TMN, because we created his profile and the rest of it. But in the process where they had challenge with registering the player with LMC and all that, they have to create another profile for the player, and LMC authorize that. In such cases, what should this club do so that we can clear out this? Because what it also means that since this player is no longer linked to this club on TMS, tomorrow it's going to be a different issue entirely. So what can this club do, this grassroots club now do to correct it now before it gets to that level where the player is moving from his present club to another club? Maybe I'll just leave it for you.
Did you?
Kelvin, should I react to that?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I think the basic thing, this is one of the situations where I like to say that the documents, would speak. It's important to have records. So in such a case, the first thing is the club affiliated with the NFF through its state FA. If it is duly affiliated, then what are the records to show that the player was registered with that grassroots club for the duration in question? First, if typically amateur clubs or grassroots clubs might not necessarily have a formal contract, but if there's maybe a registration document, maybe an ID card, but most importantly, if you participated in, say, the state league or any official competition sanctioned or recognized by the state FA or the NFF, then something like the player license. Once you have such documentation, you can actually file a complaint with the NFF. NFF is in charge of the transfer matching system in Nigeria. So you go with your evidence and file a complaint, and I'm quite sure that it will be resolved.
Thank you. Ikaro Oshoba.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Clearly.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Clearly.
Okay. Good day, everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah, this has been an educative section. I enjoyed every part of it. So I will give kudos to the organizers, Mr. Michael, Sodeke, and Mr. Eddie and the rest. So what I have to say, I don't have any question to ask, but I have a little contribution. I think the NFF should try as much as possible to have an arbitration where they can treat cases, issues locally. So we don't have to take all issues to FIFA, because there are some instances and some cases whereby some issues were taken to FIFA and it took about 1 year, 2 years to be resolved. So I think another speaker earlier said it's better we have our own local arbitration where we can have a faster answer and faster reaction to problems in our local league. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, Kola.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the lecture. It was really, really educative, and I picked up a couple of things from Mr. Kelvin. Thank you, Mr. Michael Sodeke. So I really want to ask if the issue in Nigerian football isn't more of lack of adequate intermediaries. I feel that maybe the issue is the few available intermediaries that are known to the Nigerian football. The numbers are not enough to take care of the demand to have proper representation at every level of football, in terms of coaching, in terms of players, and what have you. That's what I have to actually ask and get maybe clarification on. Thank you.
All right. I think Eddie will answer that.
I don't believe it's the number. Like the last time I checked, in the Nigeria Football Federation, we have close to about 500 registered intermediaries, and I can tell you that over 70% of these intermediaries, they don't even have a single player as their client. The problem is, I don't know how to put it, but the problem is so much that it begins with the player. Just like a lawyer is there, it won't force you to come and engage him to fight for your right in the law court. He believes that you know his role and you need him for some of these specific rules you need to play in the court of law for you. Now, I've actually, as an experienced intermediary, I've had calls to engage players. I've actually lectured them for free, and Immediately after my lecture, you see a lot of them call me, I want you to manage me, I want you to be my agent and this stuff. Then I will tell them my terms, okay, these are my terms. I will sign a contract for 2 years, I'm going to represent you, and whatever you stand to earn, you pay me 10%. Some will just say, shock, why? I'm the one playing the football, why will I pay you 10% for, I'm a professional, and I need to charge a fee for whatever service I'm going to render to you. These players, they find it difficult to part with that little fee. And because they cannot part with that fee, it's difficult for them to engage suitably qualified intermediaries. And also, I will also say there is also an aspect to it. Some of us intermediary, I'm trying to generalize it, we've actually not be too good. You know, sometimes we sign this representation contract with these players, and we sit down hands and keep, we wait for a player that you just get a job and we'll come out, oh, we are the intermediary. We don't work for this player, we don't get job for them, and it's difficult for a player to have a trust in you when you are just sitting back waiting for a commission. Sometimes some cases happen that these players, they will be in club, they will be having issues. Some intermediary, they don't step in to resolve them. Just it's not about bragging, but I can say that over time, I've actually represented some players and they have issue. Jomini and Dingba, Stanley in Sunshine, they had issue of wrongful termination of contract. And I won the case, and they were paid compensation close to about 6 million naira. And we all are aware of a case of Ukereke Mando Abuchi and Chegun Fatuashe that had their cases also announced by LMC this year. We also see that we won that case, and both players will be getting close to about 40 million naira in compensation. And LMC have already told them, if this compensation are not paid, you are not going to register players. So you will see, by the time this kind of issue comes up, and this player, they say, oh, this man won this case, immediately they will reach out to me. I also have a case of wrongful termination of a contract. I will tell them, I'm not a debt collector. I'm a professional, and for me to work for you, you have to be under my management, not when you are now being old, you will not look for me to. I'm not a debt collector. You can look for a debt collector agency to go and recover whatever you are owed by your club. So the thing is, it's not really about the numbers of intermediary. Some of these players have not really seen reason or need to get qualified intermediary or sport lawyers to represent them in the aspect of contract negotiation. Thank you.
All right. And to add to what Eddie just says, I have experience too as an intermediary. Most clubs TM or clubs owner in Nigeria, they don't like to work with players that is working with an intermediary. I have such experience before. So I will advise the players in the MPFA to engage a registered intermediary. That will help their career. Thank you. Mr. Kola, you raise your hand again.
Please don't be fast. We are about rounding this up. Behind schedule, please.
Yeah, Afis.
Mike, I think that's all. I'm not seeing any comments from every other person.
Okay. A parting note from our speakers. Udo, your parting note before we close.
Well, Michael, thank you very much all for the opportunity to be here. I think that's a very important topic to be discussed, and I learned a lot from the Nigerian market. I think both Africa and South America are essential for the football industry. We are selling markets of football talent mostly, but most of the times I think our voices are not properly heard in FIFA and international bodies. So I think it's important for us to debate the existing problems as we did today and to step up for our needs before other stakeholders in order to create a more harmonic football industry for everybody. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Udo. Barrister Kelvin, your parting note.
I just say that I just say thank you to the organizers. It's been really interesting, and the only thing I advise is we need to realize that look, sport has, and football in particular in Nigeria, has enormous potential to contribute even to the overall GDP of the country and all. So in our own little way, we'll see the improvements that we want. Thank you very much. Good luck to everyone.
All right, thank you, Barrister Kelvin. Let's hear from Tosin. Tosin, Barrister Tosin, your parting note. It seems Tosin is not, okay. It's available.
Hello?
Yeah, you are on.
Hello? Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, you are on.
I hear you. Hello?
It's like...
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much to the organizers, Mr. Endurance, Mr. Michael, and everyone. I learned a lot as well. Thank you for the opportunity. And I think it's very important that we have taken the first step in being able to identify the problems that exist, especially in this part of the world. And I hope that in our very little capacities, we would keep doing the things to push towards getting solutions to them, even as sport lawyers, as intermediaries, as officials of maybe clubs or governing bodies and the rest of them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Amobi, Barrister Amobi, your parting word.
I would like to thank you, Anfieldlane. I would like to thank Sodeke, Eddie, Barrister Kelvin. Barrister Kelvin has actually been at the front line even before some of us, his juniors, came on board, and he has been so helpful. We thank everyone, but I have to say that we must continue to fan the embers of the passion towards the actualization of all our dreams. I tell you this, in Rangers, there is insurance package for all our players. The welfare packages for the players are very important. The management of the club don't joke with this. And I believe that if in our little corners, we do these things, we try to make sure that we perform in a manner that is that will replicate international standard practices, then we would not be having this kind of discussion. We would be having discussions like how do we share solidarity, compensation, training mechanism, and all those things. I think we should be at an advanced level. We encourage the Coaches Association, we encourage the Players Union, we encourage the NFF, the League Management Company, and all stakeholders to put passion to this. And then we'll come back, let's say in a few years' time, to take a head count as to what we've been able to achieve. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Before we leave, there is a club owner online with us. Kelechi Norom is the owner of Right to Win Football Clubs. Your parting words, sir?
Hello? We can hear you.
Okay, it's been quite an exciting time listening to different speakers on this very important issue as regards contracts and as regards our players in Nigeria. And I think that we are not, because a lot of the grassroots clubs in Nigeria has actually suffered due to issues relating to training compensation, that's solidarity payments. So it's a very, very important discussion we had this morning, and I think all of us are really blessed by it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Gideon, it's also a sport lawyer and a registered intermediary, joining us from Plateau State, Jos. Your reaction, a minute, please.
I'm just checking.
Good afternoon, everyone. It has been a most exciting time. A lot of things have been said, those that we know and those that we don't. But by and large, I feel that all the discussions here should have like a communique after everything, because a lot of people have said a lot of things. And we have most experienced sports lawyers in the house, and they've also made their own contributions, which are also very vital to the development of the game in Nigeria. But most importantly, I feel that we should domesticate a lot of these ideas, and then sports lawyers need to come together as one and work more effectively, because without the sport lawyers, without the sports lawyers, some of these things cannot be enforced, because it is when we come together that we are going to put a position from the legal angle and then find a lasting solution. By and large, it has been a very, very exciting program, and then we hope that a lot of these will come up in the near future. Thank you very much.
Gideon. Yeah, finally, Barrister Emmanuel Iyamba, also joining us from Jos, Plateau State. Your reaction, a minute.
It has been a pleasure following this online and following the success story hearing. I must say, I hope you hear me, sir. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, I must say that as Barrister Gideon just loudly stated, we need to domesticate a lot of these things. It's affecting the development of our footballing industry or sporting industry as a whole in this nation. We can't change the fact that our history is faulty. Our development has been faulty. But when you want to change structures, you rebuild based on a sound foundation. I think this is vision, and I think we should further than this. But Amobi is somebody that I've been speaking with. Mr. Kelvin is another person I've only spoken to. I've never met Mr. Kelvin. But you see, this is the journey we've been talking about. Us rebuilding the system, us restructuring the system, us making sure that as intermediaries, we're developing the system. There's so much the intermediaries can do it beyond even player management, but we're not even tapping in because we don't even know our place. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I look forward to connecting with all of you on a personal level. We will do more. I am excited. God bless the hosts. God bless the thinkers that set this Zoom meeting. I think we need to raise more awareness for the next one. We should quickly organize another one, which should open the Pandora's box. And we should also try to
It's like we lost him. Barrister Nlemigbo, your parting word, please. A minute.
Thank you. Go and keep it, please. I think she's unable to connect audio. Okay, maybe she's off. You call on.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, to wrap it up, Eddie, your parting word.
I must commend every participant, though we want to apologize once again for taking your time. It does that when discussing football, sometimes to look at the time is a bit difficult. It's a journey we started since around 11 a.m. and was scheduled to end about 12:30, but here we have almost an hour extra. But it has been a very exciting time. I must commend all the participants, especially the speakers and even others that came in. I saw a lot of contribution in the chat room. I must commend you all. Some of those, your contribution were not throwing them into trash. I can tell you that they will form part of the communique that will be released as a result of this meeting. Just as Barrister Yamba said, we'll be putting together another one in a very short time. Let's keep discussing this and releasing some of this communique. Maybe, sorry, I have to bring the Bible. Just like the wicked king in the Bible, Jesus talked about that after several attempts, he wants to hack into the request of that woman. So maybe after several discussion on this topic, NFF will have to see reason to set up some of all this judicial body to work effectively. Thank you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I want to appreciate you for your time. You have been with us since 11, and this is 23 past 1. So I want to appreciate all of you for your time, for your contribution. Well, to appreciate each of us, let's put a clap. Let's clap for ourselves. Wherever you are, those in Rio de Janeiro, Abuja, Warri, just clap. Put a clap together. Thank you, and I hope when we call you some other time, you will like to be with us. Thank you. Do have a wonderful.
Of course.
Do have a nice day. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Yes, sir.